part of the Future of Food Symposium Day 1. And this is an event that's going to take a more of a focus on the kind of frontline reality of community food provisioning in the pandemic. And we're going to present some research today. So you're going to have a short film entitled "It Was the Right Thing to Do: A View from the Front Line," and this is some footage collected by Marsha. Is it just in Nottingham, Marsha?
Yeah,
is that right? Yeah, in Nottingham, of the kind of reality that the community food groups there have been experiencing during the pandemic. And then Marsha's going to present the research that's behind this and all the kind of really in-depth insight of what's been happening. And then we'll go over to Simone Connolly, the director of Fareshare Midlands, and Hannah Gallimore from the Central London Co-op. And they're going to give a short presentation as well to reflect on the same thing. So their role in supporting community food organisations during the pandemic. And I think this event is really about this kind of reflection, this insight into what's been happening almost behind the scenes. I think whilst we've heard a lot around the kind of Marcus Rashford and all the campaigns, there's a huge amount of work that's being undertaken in the community that I think has gone unnoticed, and I think we're really starting to unearth the kind of reality that's been going on. So we've got a short film for you, and I'll share this now. And I might just play the beginning of it to make sure that the sound's working okay. Okay. Can we all see that? Yeah? Can we all hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'll let this play through.
You must stay at home. You should not be meeting family members who do not live in your home. You should not be going shopping except for essentials like food and medicine.
I'm gonna see what's going on in it with Bedlam. I've never seen it like it in my life. I don't think I'll ever probably see it again like it.
We had a lot of groups needing food right at the beginning of the pandemic. We were getting about 26, 30 pallets in a week, and we were full to the roof, and the amount of people collecting, yeah, it was very, very busy.
Let's go. So this is an order of nearly 1 ton of food.
And I know what I've put into that. I put my life at risk. I put my family life at risk. We are the grassroots. Without us, the food cannot go nowhere.
Well done, guys.
Without we giving food to the people, because we are the most important element there. Fareshare cannot just come on the street and put it on the street and start giving it out.
We are here at the beautiful Hillview Centre, where I am just sorting through some of the many food donations that we have received this weekend. We're going to package this up and give some as food parcels, and we're also going to use some to make meals. So 3 times a week at the moment, we're cooking for up to 50 people. Deconstructed shepherd's pie.
You know, delivering around the village and chatting to the people who normally wouldn't access these kind of services, but had no money, and so we've had all sorts of people.
Rose and Chris, hello.
They're doing a marvellous job, and everything what they do is you can really sit and enjoy it. It's lovely.
And when Boris Johnson says, right, in March we're going to lift this, we're going to lift that, the effects of COVID
are going to be in these communities for years. They're not going to end in March, they're not going to end in September. It's going to be another year or two before some families can get back on their feet.
Okay. We'll make that available on YouTube following this, so if anyone wants to watch it again at their own time, they can. But quite a powerful film, I think. And some really good footage there of what's been happening. Okay, so I'll hand back to Marsha, who's going to share the presentation.
Okay. Right, you can hear me all right?
Yeah,
Yep.
we can hear you.
And you can see the screen. You can see the screen.
I can't at the moment. I'm back on the gallery view in Zoom.
Let me just hold on a sec. I've gone to full screen. Right, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, right, I'll start in a sec. And I'll disappear. And Jordan, if you can't hear me, just message me. But I'll get on with this now.
Okay.
So toilet paper aside, one of the most important needs that emerged during the UK during the early stages of the lockdown was the demand for food. So we had panic buying and temporary shortages, which created a huge level of anxiety amongst the public about food supplies. And whilst the supermarkets scrambled to up their online delivery slots and the government announced the provision of food parcels for those on statutory lists, behind the scenes, the community food sector was also mobilising to meet the unprecedented rise in requests for help. In Nottingham City, where our research is based, during the first 3 months of lockdown, one food network alone delivered over 60,000 meals and 16,000 food parcels. And these groups provided not only nutritional sustenance to residents, but they were also the very vital face-to-face contact for people that people needed during this period of flux. And much of the food they distributed was provided by Fareshare Midlands, a regional surplus food redistribution charity, who themselves saw a 68% increase in the volumes of food they dispatched in 1 month compared to the same period of the previous year. But despite these considerable efforts, actually very little is known about how the community food sector worked to meet this record level of need. And if we're to ensure that citizens can be fed and cared for during the next stress test of our social system, we need to better understand how this sector is organised and functions. But beyond a food aid, food charity, and often food waste narrative, there's a gap in both empirical and conceptual scholarship, which our research is seeking to address. And we've addressed this gap by engaging with the community food sector, and in particular the Nottingham Social Eating Network, Central England Co-op, the local authority, and our research partner, Fareshare Midlands. And we used in-depth research, in-depth interviews, quantitative data from Fareshare, and film and photography content, which captured a snapshot of this unique period. Fareshare and Central England Co-op are going to be talking through their responses shortly. So in this presentation, we focus mainly on the community food groups. We were interested in understanding how these organisations responded to the pandemic and what enabled and constrained the delivery of community food services at this time. And our research on community food sector demonstrates that really there's like an invisibilised infrastructure that is delivering much more than food. And these more than food services are enacted through some distinctive but overlapping sets of practices, which involve not just resources that are deployed by organisations or jobs undertaken by individuals, but which might be better thought of as sets of practices which are distributed across organisations. And we're now going to discuss how each part of this sector initially responded to the lockdown, and then we'll look at the specific enabling and constraining factors. So the City Council in Nottingham, they rapidly contacted an array of community food groups. They established a list of authenticated referral channels, and they set up a centralised helpline which triaged food requests to the local area managers, and from then on to these specific groups who could deliver food on a ward-by-ward basis to individuals in need. Fareshare Midlands extended their depot footprint into Nottingham to cope with the surge in demand for food, and alongside their usual surplus food supplies, they received large volumes of catering-sized stock, large amounts of short-dated foods, and they also worked to house and distribute the central government-funded ambient or long life stock. And in Nottingham, the community food groups who were already operating across most wards of the city, mainly as social eating or public meal services, which in pre-COVID times provided affordable meals using foods from Fareshare, they had to rapidly and safely transform their face-to-face meals into meal delivery services during the pandemic. So the overall picture here is of a fairly extensive citywide community food sector working to establish communication between organisations, trying to rapidly extend its capacity, being stress tested, but which was able to organise and coordinate rapidly due to the pre-existence of a range of material resources, skills, forms of know-how, due to statutory commitments, but also fundamentally because of a shared desire to protect vulnerable residents. And specifically what enabled groups were strategic decisions were made by the local authority to support pre-existing groups. And this meant that organisations were able to carry on delivering services despite losing many of their paying and face-to-face customers. And it was decided that these groups were providing services prior to the pandemic and that they should be protected and supported where possible. And central government money underpinned much of the funding that was then dispersed to these community partners. Fareshare Midlands, they worked rapidly, proactively to secure surplus and ambient food stocks for their regional members. They took the pandemic really seriously and they planned for mid and long-term food shortages, and they built up food stocks in the region. They underwent a period of considerable growth, setting up a whole new depot in Nottingham. And Fareshare was able to reassure local authorities of the authenticity of specific food groups because they already had prior relationships with them. And these good relationships with their members meant that excess food was often dispersed very rapidly, out of hours, and through joint efforts to minimise food waste. The groups themselves, they moved rapidly from face-to-face to meal delivery services, and they were already conversant with health and safety regulations, food hygiene standards, and they had the appropriate safeguarding already in place. They were already confident with using surplus, short-dated, large, variable volumes of food, which meant that their services dovetailed relatively effectively with the uptick in donations that Fareshare Midlands were receiving. Groups benefited from this increasing funding during this time, and this was aided by them being already known to Fareshare and in some cases the local authority. These groups are relatively horizontally organised with a high degree of autonomy, which meant that they could make decisions quickly to effectively scale their services, and actually they were able to respond to the dietary and culturally specific requests for food. These groups also linked peer-to-peer, and they were able to share information and resources within their network. And fundamentally, these groups were extremely flexible, agile, responsive types of food services. They partnered in innovative ways with like local taxi services, for example, to deliver hot meals across the city. But most significantly, they were already closely linked into communities and acted as trusted ambassadors with very localised knowledge about frightened, vulnerable people within their communities that needed support. So the picture here is of enabling is to do with the community food sector mobilising already existing assets and resources, but also forming new partnerships, new ways of working, but many of which were predicated upon good relationships, agile channels of communication, and really the willingness of stakeholders to work above and beyond job remits, contracted hours, and official duties. So what constrained groups? For the City Council in Nottingham, gathering intelligence and mobilising contacts on the ground were its greatest challenge. So during the early stages of the lockdown, it became increasingly apparent that there were record numbers of people who weren't on any of the council registers as potentially requiring especially statutory support. However, to confidently refer individuals via the hotline that they set up to the appropriate support, they relied upon Fareshare's compliancy procedures and the authenticity of some of these networks, such as the Nottingham Social Eating Network. Fareshare Midlands they were an invaluable link to food in the region, and the need for safe, accessible food meant that they worked far beyond their usual capacity and remit. They had to put into place extra safety practices, deal with huge volumes of very short-dated or difficult to disperse food, and they extended their footprint and infrastructure to meet this demand without any guarantee of ongoing support for this investment. Groups, although some of them did charge, many offered services without referral, which meant that their limited funds were soon depleted. And many groups expressed concern over the funding cliff edge with no transitional funding to support groups as they try and return to face-to-face services. Some groups couldn't access the council-run venues, and small kitchens, lack of preparation space made maintaining social distancing problematic for some of the groups. They experienced challenges in running their services because vulnerable members of key staff had to shield, which meant that the fewer staff were having to work for longer hours. They had to undertake new risk assessments, trial new ways of working, borrow ideas and procedures, say from the fast food industry, for example, to transform into meal delivery services. But there was no official or specific guidance from the government about the community food sector, despite these groups undertaking the majority of emergency meal provisioning across the city. Staff and volunteers worked very long hours, often unsociably, and they felt compelled to go out of their way to help at short notice. Groups across the research all expressed fears around being exposed to COVID. And as the face-to-face representation of unpredictable government guidelines, staff and volunteers sometimes faced abuse. They were scared, they felt unsafe, and they were sometimes threatened by residents. So the picture here is of the community food sector having to navigate really complex limitations in and changes to their material environment, having to scale, amplify their workloads, but often without government protection, guidance, and often at risk to themselves. So the overview of our findings. So this work remains really largely invisibilised, and it really requires some empirical and conceptual clarification. Framing this through a practice-informed approach is what we're going to be doing, which directs us to consider these insights as involving not just behaviours or the rational choices of individuals, but as being caught up in these complicated material, performative and discursive arrangements. And this approach allows us to account for how material factors such as the scope and the funding, the availability of vehicles, warehouses, food containers, for example, all shape the delivery of services. The materiality of surplus itself can be understood as shaping some very specific sets of logistical practices due to its perishability. And these materialities intersect to shape roles, responsibilities, liabilities, as individuals and groups seek to uphold food hygiene regulations, for example. And this approach also articulates how narrative or discursive values are entangled into the delivery of food services. So this desire to provide personalised face-to-face contact or to work beyond job remits to go that extra mile for a resident. These are also shaped by broader ideas about the value of care, of community, of society itself, and especially when social order is shifting or being threatened. So we've provided a context for and empirical insights into the Nottingham's community food sector responses during the pandemic, and we've suggested a conceptual approach that can help make sense of these responses. We're now going to propose 3 formative findings that have emerged from our research. So perhaps not surprisingly, the common theme of today's symposium, practices of partnership. The expansion of food aid responses required the joining up of social networks beyond kinship groups or beyond job description, and new partnerships to procure, process and provide meals emerged. Multiple diverse actors across the city converged to both receive and contribute. For example, taxi drivers are said to become meal delivery services, car parks became socially distanced food drop-off spots, which we see as evidence of partnership practices. Practices of procedure. So closely related to and underpinning these partnerships were numerous procedural practices such as social distancing, new risk assessments, logistics of storing, transporting, cooking, delivering meals, some of which were borrowed or carried over from other sectors such as the fast food sector. Surplus itself, as I've said, its perishability and the volumes and variability of food also shape procedural practices around its distribution, drawing upon both technical know-how, but also upon acts of innovation to deliver food services. And practices of caring. So social relationships despite social distancing, were absolutely vital, and members were the human interface between vulnerable people and the food services that were sustaining them. So door knocking, waiting for that brief catch-up chat, checking up on customers with phone calls, thanking, being thanked, putting extra food items in customers' bags, paying meals forward, sharing spare food containers, all examples of the myriad forms of caring practices that the network and their partners have engaged in across the city. So to conclude, the community food sector is an asset which has mitigated the worst effects of COVID. These groups form a social infrastructure that protected not just poor people, but those struggling to access food for a variety of non-financial reasons. And the community food sector, in partnership with Fareshare Midlands and the local authority, they all acted as community anchors who worked together to provide not just food supplies, but a friendly face and safe contact in times of need. So money alone didn't address the crisis in food security, because these responses relied on pre-existing resources, relationships, forms of knowledge and skill, and shared values which came together in unique ways, and which drew upon other areas of social life. So adding material and financial resources to these networks was important, but it was only one part of forming effective policies going forward. And so if these organisations are going to remain effective in the face of oncoming and crises around unemployment, mental ill health, climate change, further pandemics, insights such as the one that we have provided here are vital, and our research directs policy intervention to take into account the complex practices which occur across organisations and beyond job roles, which have enabled the delivery of safe, sociable and sustainable community food services. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you,
Okay.
Marsha. Yeah, it's a really interesting insights there. Again, so we'll move on to the next part of the event. If anyone wants to put any questions in the chat, they can. I think the chat's free at the moment. But we'll move on to hear from Simone, Connolly and Hannah Gallimore. And you've got your own presentation, I understand, that you're going to share.
Yeah, I just saw it. Did somebody kind of contributing to this via the chat? Because somebody just had their hand up. Or they just... Okay, Rory.
I can't see anyone with their hand up at the moment. But if there are any questions, put them in the chat, and that's we'll put them to the speakers. Okay.
I can't see the slides, Hannah. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Marsha. Anyway, that was really, really interesting and fabulous to hear the conclusion. So thank you very much from me and everyone at Fareshare Midlands for that. Most of you probably know about Fareshare and kind of the scale, but I thought it'd just be really interesting just for me to cover kind of, when we talk about Fareshare Midlands, what do we actually do? What does our operation look like? So Fareshare Midlands is part of the Fareshare network. The Fareshare network consists of 21 regional centres, massive warehouses from Aberdeen right down to Cornwall. Fareshare Midlands, we have 6 warehouses, quite big warehouses. We cover a square mile footage, if you like, of 11,000 miles. So we go right to the East Coast to the Welsh border. And we support over 600 community organisations, some frontline community organisations, both charities and non-charities, but non-profit making organisations. So Marsha already spoke about kind of the increase in kind of output, the increase in demand during the height of the pandemic, but actually over the last 12 months, well, April to April, we actually redistributed nearly 8,000 tonnes of good quality surplus food. That more than doubled our output from the previous year. So we had to significantly scale up our operation. Kind of, what does that actually look like? So our 6 warehouses actually receiving at least 60 Arctic loads of food every single week. So that's a big old operation. And to actually get that food out to our members, we have 26 delivery vehicles on the road delivering out to our community food members. So it's very industrial. And I think kind of the benefit to the food industry and the reason why DEFRA did actually kind of, work with Fareshare and other big kind of, organisations is that we have that scale, we have that infrastructure. Yes, we had to upscale, but we had, by far the biggest infrastructure that allowed us to support collectively across the Fareshare network over 12,000 community organisations during the height of the pandemic. So this slide is actually slightly outdated. We've actually got 6 depots, 6 regional centres across the Midlands. We've now got 60 staff members who help us deal with this food, and we've now actually got over 250 volunteers. So the response to supporting Fareshare has been incredible. The challenge for us is actually keeping those volunteer numbers, volunteers coming through our doors and supporting our operation. But yeah, I mean, when in December 2020, I think we had 32 staff members. So we're having to take on more and more people to support our operation and support the voluntary sector with essential food. Yeah, these figures also slightly outdated, but easily accessible if you want these figures to be backed up. But the reason why we exist is that there's 8.4 million people in the UK who struggle to afford a meal, a decent meal, who struggle to afford, have access to good food. And at the same time, the food industry, there's a huge amount of surplus food across the supply chain. The biggest amount of food that's being wasted is from farming. So 2 million tonnes a year from manufacturers and retail. I think most people actually, see retailers as the people in the food industry that waste food. Most food, that's not right. So they're kind of in the middle there, 190,000 tonnes, so a huge amount. By comparison, last year, Fareshare redistributed 24,000 tonnes. So we really are scratching at the surface. Fareshare Midlands are scratching at the surface of what food is available. So 8.4 million people who are struggling to afford to eat food, and millions of, 2 million tonnes of food being wasted, over, 2.2 million tonnes of food being wasted across the supply chain. So that is why we are banging on the door all of the time to try and, create solutions to, let's get this food that's out there to organisations that are supporting people in the communities that need that support. So that food, if we could redistribute all of that food, would actually create 1.3 billion meals a year. So we've got a big challenge on our hands. So I think it's important to also say is surplus food is never going to go away. When you produce something, it's very likely you're going to have overproduction. I think what is important is that there is a solution to kind of, linking up that surplus food to where it's needed. There's many reasons why surplus food occurs. I would say probably the number one reason is forecasting. It's very difficult for our retailers to know exactly how many people are going to walk through their doors and buy those products that their manufacturers and their producers have delivered into them. But there's all sorts of other reasons, damage is incorrect, short dated coding, packaging errors, that kind of thing. But forecasting is the number one reason why we have surplus food. And, we have to support the fact that retailers they need their shelves full. They are here to make, to make a living, to make a profit, to employ people. So that is, that's absolute priority for them. So that won't ever change, but what we have to accept is surplus food is there because of the way that the food industry operates, and we need to do something really positive with that food. So we have 2 types of solutions at Fareshare. One is Arctic lorries delivering to our regional centres, thousands and thousands of tonnes a year. That food is sorted, handled by a team of staff and volunteers, and then delivered out to our community organisations, or our community organisation collect that food. The other solution is a back of store solution, where we basically link up local charities to a back of store via a number of different retailers who we're all familiar with. And those charities go in and collect that food at the end of the day. They take that back to their premises and either cook with it or kind of, give that food out in food parcels. That solution is actually funded by the food industry. So actually there's no cost incurred by the community organisations that's collecting that food. But we're always looking at kind of innovative ways of actually how we can develop that, how we can make sure that no food in the supply chain is wasted. And another solution we've been working on now for the past, I think, 3 years is what we call a backhaul solution, who we do in partnership with Central Living Co-op. And you'll hear more about that fantastic solution in a couple of minutes. So just kind of, our social impact. So who do we work with? What do our charities say about us? 75% of the charities say that the food that we distribute to them enables them to engage better with their individuals. I can't actually see the slide. 93% of people say having a meal through Fareshare's community network helped them face the day ahead. So just some nice kind of facts there about, you know, the social impact, the difference that I think we all know that food can make to our community organisations and those that they're serving. I think quite worryingly, 1 in 5 of those charities would say they would close down if they didn't receive a Fareshare subscription. So those organisations will be very typically, their kind of core service will be around food. So they're the types of organisations that we work with, a whole range of organisations. Those organisations have to make sure that those organisations are compliant from a food safety perspective. That's the kind of reassurance that we give to the hundreds of food companies that we work with who deliver their food into us every single week. But yeah, all different. So, you know, from children's projects to day centres to drop-in services, a whole range of different organisations. That picture has changed though, obviously because of COVID. If you go to the next slide. So we surveyed our members to see, you know, it was obvious that they're having to change the types of food that they not only need, but then they can kind of pass on to their members. And 86% reverted to just supplying food parcels. So that's a huge amount of our members. But only 25% of our members responded to the survey, but we knew that was the picture. So our challenge is now, how do we work with these organisations to move them away from just supplying food parcels? Because surplus food doesn't look like ambient food, food parcel type food. Surplus food comes in many forms, and cooking food is much more aligned to surplus food. And by being able to use as much surplus food as possible, it helps those organisations be financially sustainable. So that's a big challenge that we have. That isn't just a local Midlands picture, that is also a national picture as well. So it's something that Fareshare as a whole network is considering how we, and part of this kind of programme and the work that we'll be doing with Marsha will be considering how we help these organisations adapt to, you know, to the next, over the next couple of years, and help them to provide a sustainable food solution. I think I'm over to Hannah now.
Okay, thanks. So if you guys want to present, and then we'll have a short question answer.
Sorry, no, it just wouldn't let me unmute for some reason while I was sharing, which was really inconvenient. So apologies for that. So I'll just share my screen again. I'll keep this short in terms of an introduction to Central England. We are an independent cooperative.
Okay, I think you're on mute again, Hannah.
Well, that's very weird. So every time I share, I go on mute. So I'm not going to share. So that's fine. And I'll share the video in a minute. We'll do without slides. That's fine. So we have over 500 trading businesses. About 260 of those are retail. The rest are funeral. And obviously for various unhappy reasons, we've all been very busy the last 18 months. We are a cooperative guided by sort of international set of values and principles, which includes equality and equity, which means that we take our responsibility to sort of equal and fair access to food very seriously. And also our guiding principles of self-help and self-responsibility. I mean, not only do we want to feed hungry people, but we want to support people to move away from having to rely on those kinds of services. So employability schemes, financial management, there's lots and lots of things that we have tried to support. And one of the reasons the Fareshare model for us is a great fit is because of all the added extra benefits that those groups that Simone's just talked about are giving people. It's not just about feeding people. So we had some issues that we were trying to solve internally, and obviously today's session is about fighting hunger and tackling food waste. As a retailer, obviously, as Simone's just said, we have waste in our system for lots and lots of different reasons. We'd worked really hard to try and minimise that, and our waste profile is reasonably lean for a supermarket, under 1%. Our stakeholders, internal and external, our members, our colleagues, didn't like us throwing food away. Over and over and over again, it came up at members' meetings and colleague meetings. Why are we throwing food in the bin? We wanted to mitigate our environmental impact. We're committed to a call toward 2025, which is around reducing the resources required to supporting the food industry. We are Carbon Trust accredited for waste, and it's just the wrong thing to do when we've got hungry people in our communities. But we tried different models. We tried the classic end of day collections by a small charity or a group of charities from literally from the back door. But we never seem to. Most of our stores are convenience, so they're not very big. They don't have a huge amount of waste at the end of every day. And we didn't seem to have the right food in the right places at the right time to keep those organisations interested for very long. They also struggled with storage and capacity to come and collect. And we were really conscious that maybe what we were doing was shifting our waste onto the third sector organisation. So, you know, if we're giving somebody a tray of lettuces and a pot of hummus, you know, what are they reasonably going to do with that? Probably it's going to end up in the bin. So actually what we're doing is what they're doing is then effectively handling our waste for us. And that absolutely wasn't what we were all about. And that led us to this big relationship with Fareshare. It is still a one of a kind. It's cost neutral for us because we've reduced our food waste by 40% over the last year as a result of the project. So the savings that we're getting on our waste disposal, we support Fareshare with the offsetting of the costs that it costs to run the programme. It's absolutely sympathetic to our current processes, so it sits nicely between our reduce to clear and our waste processes. It's carbon efficient because we're backhauling, so we're using empty lorries. So when they deliver their next chilled delivery, they get their next lot collected, it's backhauled to a single location, and then it's transferred en masse just 5 miles down the road to the Fareshare hub. So the way it works is that we support with a per store charge, which offsets the cost that Fareshare have to incur to run that programme. We've also made investments in terms of the setup. We supported during COVID with various bits of investment around extra logistics. And we've also tried to find other ways to work together to really deepen that relationship. So we've donated some of our apprenticeship levy. We've donated lots of office furniture that we have no use for because we're all working from home. And there's all sorts of other ways that we try and support. We're also very keen on sort of amplifying the messages around Fareshare's strategy, and also the groups, the great work that the groups that they work with are doing in our communities. I'm conscious of time. I was going to play a video, but I don't think I'm going to because I think it might be too much if there's any questions. But basically the film outlines how the process works from end to end. So in very, very basic terms, what happens at the end of the day, instead of putting the waste that is in scope for this project in the bin, it is bagged, it is stored appropriately, so in a chilled environment if necessary, and it is collected the next day by one of our drivers, because we own our own logistics fleet. They then take it back to our distribution centre where it's checked and collated, and then it is taken once or twice a day, depending on quantities, to Fareshare, and they get it out the same day. We would call it a sort of a just-in-time model. So we're taking food right off the shelf, right at the end of its shelf life, and then it is back out again within 24 hours, normally to the community groups. And it allows the community groups to get what they need when they need it. So they may have weekly or twice weekly deliveries or collections. And what it affords us as a community convenience-based retailer is the economies of scale. So we can get it all into one place at one go using existing road miles, and it goes back out the other end and to exactly the profile that those organisations need. Obviously, there have been challenges over the last year that we've had to deal with, and they've had a knock-on effect in various different ways on the project. So as with everyone, keeping our colleagues safe has been our number one priority. We have had COVID-related absence for obvious reasons, and shielding. We've had to be conscious of the extra miles that we've been doing, both environmentally and cost-wise, because our supply chain has been under so much stress. We haven't had the food all the time. In the session earlier, I mentioned that, in March last year, our contributions to Fareshare hit an all-time low and took months to recover. We just didn't have the food available to give. But there were obviously also opportunities. So there were great opportunities internally. I think our colleagues would say that they're much closer as teams. So there were also benefits. What have we achieved? Well, it's still one of a kind. It's an award winner. The model has shown over the last year that it is resilient and very strong. And we've delivered through that process over 2 million meals so far. It's bearing in mind, as a retailer, we only have 0.5% of the market share, but we're delivering over nearly closer to 2% of the UK redistribution market, so which we're incredibly proud of. What happens to the food when we give it to Fareshare? The vast majority, about 80% of it, is sent onward for human consumption. There is an amount that goes to animal feed, and then there is a very small amount that is sent to anaerobic digestion. So the final destination for this food is also upholding that waste hierarchy and reducing food waste as much as we can. Simone, are you taking over? I'll share the slides again if you want.
Just to say that this is the last event of the day, so if you have to run over a little bit, that's fine. But it would be great if we had a chance to ask some questions, perhaps feedback on the research and the video that we presented, as well as the materials that you're sharing as well. But back to Simone.
You sharing the slides, Hannah? No, okay. Well, whilst Hannah's trying to share the slides, I just wanted to kind of conclude with the challenges that kind of are ahead of us over the next 12 months at least. And COVID sits nice and firmly at the top there. COVID clearly hasn't gone away. We're still in a pandemic. It's COVID, the impact of COVID, the ongoing challenges that our members face is going to continue to make things very difficult for us. I think funding for the voluntary sector is going to be really, really difficult. Yes, I said in the session earlier that money has enabled us to do so much more as a sector, but that will change. So the impact of COVID will just continue to make things very difficult. Brexit. So COVID's kind of hidden Brexit for a while, but it's very much firmly back on the table, particularly in relation to the supply chain. So in terms of we've got a HGV crisis that most of you will be aware of. The food industry are really, really struggling, not just the food industry, but industry is struggling for getting stock into the country, getting stock to the places where it needs to be at the right times. That is very likely to get worse. So where does that kind of leave Fareshare in the pecking order? I mean, the food industry have been amazingly supportive of their commitment to ensuring surplus food gets redistributed. But is that going to, are we going to see that kind of situation change? Fareshare Midlands has been extremely resilient and responsive to the crisis. And so therefore food coming into our network is okay, but the national picture is not looking very good. And we know that there's this HGV crisis. We know that the food industry is struggling. So we are under pressure to take in any food that's offered to us. But that means a challenge with our members. We know that our members haven't quite opened up yet in the way that they want to start cooking. They're still kind of supplying food parcels. So we're trying to take in everything we can, anticipating that this HGV crisis is going to get worse, but it's causing us issues in terms of managing our members because we just can't quite get them the food that they need. And kind of the next point kind of follows on from that. And in November, I think the rules around Brexit in terms of bringing food in, stock into the country change. It gets much worse. So therefore, we could be seeing much more waste at the borders. So that food may not even make it to food companies. There might not be any food to be wasted. So it's something we're monitoring really, really closely, trying to understand what impact it has to our members. We're doing everything we can to support our current network of members and to also take on more members, but it's looking very, very challenging. We have a campaign which I'll talk about just very, very briefly in a minute, but so the government, their government have put a huge amount of investment into kind of the emergency response, via, DEFRA. But has that then enabled them to, or allowed them to take that eye off kind of the political importance of, it's really important that surplus food is redistributed. And that's why we've got a campaign that's just gone live this week. So hopefully we can kind of re-engage them and say, look, it's absolutely the right thing to do to redistribute food, but you're going to have to put some investment into this. Some of the small food companies, the farmers, producers, they can't afford to. They work on such small margins that the government, like they do with renewable energy, we need them to put some investment into redistribution for the benefit of our 12,000 members. And of course, less public interest. We had a huge surge in support from volunteers, more than ever, but our profile rate, was raised. 1 in 100 people had heard about Fareshare and the work that we do pre-pandemic, but now that's 1 in 3. But over time, people move on to something else. So that's another challenge that we are facing as an organisation, that kind of volunteer support. And the only way that we can, be kind of a viable, sustainable, affordable solution to our members is by the amazing support of our volunteers. So we have to work twice as hard to get less volunteers through our doors now. And I'm sure that's the same challenge that many of our members are facing. And the other one is really just the resilience of the voluntary sector. I mean, I kind of, yes, I'm the director of Fareshare Midlands, but I do still work very, very closely with many of our members, and they're tired. You know what? They're really tired. They've had 18 months of working so hard, doing amazing, incredible work to support their communities. But, I've seen, examples of, look, you could do this, even money being offered to these projects, but they just can't do it. They haven't got the energy to carry on working like they have. And I'm sure it will come back, but the next 12 months, I just think summary is it's going to be challenging for all of us, not just Fareshare Midlands. So the work that Marsha's doing, the research work, how do we come out of this? What's our exit strategy almost, and how do we get things back? And it's never going to go back to how it was before, but that's why today and all of this work is really, really important, because we need to do things differently. And it's going to be an interesting 12 months. Hannah, just want to go to the next slide. So I'm doing a bit of kind of plugging here. So we've got a campaign that's gone live this week. So the summary is what we're basically saying. It's much cheaper for farmers to waste good food. Most of us that know that are here today. In France, they redistribute 6 times more food than we do in this country. There are some flaws with our system, and we also don't want to kind of put taxation on it in this country. What we want the government to do is recognise that they're putting a huge amount of investment into renewable energy. What we want them to do is put a bit more investment into redistribution and recognise how important it is that food is redistributed. We're not trying to say to the government, look, this is the answer to, the poverty situation, the disgusting poverty situation that we have in this country, but it cannot be right that all of this food is being wasted, and it's cheaper for farmers to actually waste it than to redistribute it. So help them. We're not asking for money for Fareshare, we're asking for money for redistribution to help these food companies get food into our network so we can support thousands of organisations that we support. So just a bit of a plug here to say, if you can look out for this campaign on social media and follow it, retweet it, and try and get us as much support as we possibly can get.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Simone. So we'll have some time for, let's maybe aim for maybe 3 questions. I know that we've run over time a little bit. Well, I wanted to begin by asking Simone and Hannah, did you have any comments on the film and the research that Marsha presented, especially in relation to perhaps how you've seen the community food sector mobilise over the pandemic and your experience of managing the resources and the services that you deliver?
No, I mean, you know, most of it isn't a surprise to us. You know, we've been really in the thick of it at Fareshare. So, you know, whilst they've scaled up, we've scaled up as well. We've had to scale up to help them scale up, or not necessarily scale up, but do things differently. I think that, you know, I've just kind of gone through the challenges, you know, the risks of what lies ahead. And it'd be interesting to know from Marsha what her views are, because Marsha is kind of the social eating queen, isn't she? What her views are of kind of getting that going again, and how long do we think that could be? And the answer could be you don't know, but you're working very closely with these groups, so it'd be interesting to know what you think, Marsha.
The information I'm getting from groups is really that they want to be running some hybrid services, that they recognise that just a transition back into face-to-face meal services is going to be problematic. I think some of them it's actually just logistical, like you say, it's actually getting access to spaces, getting those volunteer teams built back up again. Some of it is also that they've had a load of new customers that have become used to receiving meals, and maybe they actually want meals delivered, and that's the transitional funding I think that's required, and the transitional campaigns that are required to get those people back out into public spaces safely, and also to engage. There's loads of people that came across the community food sector for the first time that benefited from having that pre-existing network that was able. So again, I've said that money alone doesn't solve the problem, and we know it was very helpful, but at the same time, this is what the call is. If you need ongoing investment into these networks so that they're when you need them, because you could have just had, you know, money put onto the system, but you can't, if you don't know where the people are and you don't know the types of support they need, that you can't WhatsApp them on Saturday morning saying I've got 15,000 sandwiches that need moving. You actually need to have those relationships as well, and that takes time and it takes regular investment. So a lot of the groups are looking for sort of maybe hybrid services where they'll do some sort of meals delivered and face-to-face. And I think a lot of them are looking for support around how we have campaigns that can encourage people back out into public spaces. And I think there's also a lot of groups that have basically demonstrated the value of what they do. So public health, for example, in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire, has now put social eating along with local growing at the top of their public health agenda for the next few years. And so again, I think there's been a big shift in culture to recognising this isn't just something that's sort of nice to do, or that is about poor people and waste food. I think a lot of the groups have been able to argue very successfully to some of these bodies that the work that they've been doing is a form of social infrastructure that's doing much more than food. And so I think that's really where the opportunities are going to be, and the challenges is getting people back out into public spaces, and also mobilising paying customers. So again, a lot of the groups are precarious because if they don't have a paying customer, they themselves are precarious. That means their membership with Fareshare is precarious. So I think there's some opportunities to rethink some of the ways that some of those relationships are sort of set up over the next couple of years. So
thank you.
I could talk to you more about this at some point, but yeah, I know we've already got a certain amount of time.
Great. Okay. So yeah, if anyone else has got any questions, come in. But so you mentioned, Simone, in the presentation that some of the organisations that were on one of the slides, they might not be kind of continuing in the future. So I wanted to ask that, I know that you expanded because there was so much need in the pandemic, that you expanded perhaps without the support that was there in the background. So what's almost like the future for some of these community food groups, and maybe even for Fareshare? And I just kind of hope it's not like a situation where they're reaching a cliff edge. You know, it's sort of the funding needs to come now, or all this all kind of wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the members are still open. It's just they've changed what they do to support their community. Is there a cliff edge coming? That's a very good question. Probably there is. We're almost there. I think for Fareshare, we have very much got to focus on the environmental side of what we do as well. We've lost sight of that as in our response to the pandemic. Is we just responded to what we thought was the right thing to do for our members. They couldn't cook anymore, so we kind of lobbied the support of the government and kind of got them the food that enabled them to support their members. And that's going to take some very careful manoeuvring out of kind of this emergency response for Fareshare and our community organisations. And what signing up members, encouraging them to cook, that kind of thing was quite an easy process before. That's going to be more difficult because of COVID, because of the constraints of COVID, just like Marsha's just said. So engaging with not only our existing network of members, but trying to encourage other community organisations to work with Fareshare and other redistributors. We're not the only redistributor, but it's the right thing to work with surplus food redistributors. Is just difficult. It's difficult. So it's more challenging now, but I think it was never going to be easy, was it? We all did what we thought was the right thing, but I think the important thing is for Fareshare to position. Fareshare's got to also try and work with as many food companies, because things will stop, demand will stop. We know that the numbers are there, the needs there, but in terms of the community organisations, they will come back. So we've got to start working with the food industry and the government now to rally that support, and that's what we're doing. That's what this campaign is all about. Long-winded answer there, Jordon, but yes, it's very challenging for all of us, the whole of the voluntary sector.
Yeah, I'll ask one final question. I don't know if Dave, did you want to come in and ask anything? I've got one last question. If not,
you go ahead, Jordon.
Okay. So the theme of the symposium is from recovery to resilience. I'm just going to ask Hannah in this one. So I wondered, is there anything over the course of the pandemic, any of these new processes or procedures or expanse of these services that you think has made you more resilient in the long term? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in the future with COVID, etc. And we have so much disruption at the moment with Brexit, etc. I just wondered if perhaps is there lessons learned here? Is there procedures that you can say that you're a more resilient organisation now, and that relationship of working with community food organisations, is that more resilient now than it was before?
Well, as a business, we have learned a huge amount over the last 18 months. Our demographic of the people who shop with us tend to prefer to come in for their milk and their pint and have their paper and have a little chat with us, and they might come in 2 or 3 times a day. And it's part of their, we're talking about a certain age of person who has lived in the area for a very long time, knows all the staff, and it is part of the community. What happened when lockdown was announced was we basically had no way of supporting our most loyal customers and the most vulnerable in our communities. And there are a lot of communities where we're the only shop. And very quickly we realised that, having said, being stalwarts of the come into our shop and shop, it's a community resource, use it. We had no online offering, we had no home delivery set up, and we very quickly had to respond to that. And it was very, very difficult. But we got there, and that is there to stay, and that will make us more resilient should we ever go through this again. It's obviously also opened up a huge, different channels for us. We've got we're on board with Too Good To Go now as well. So that's creating a new channel of getting food out and being closer to our ambition of zero food waste. So yes, definitely, we have learned a huge amount in terms of the groups that we work with, and this goes for what we know from working with Fareshare, but we also have lots of relationship with lots of grassroots food organisations ourselves. Is through our community dividend scheme. What we did in May time last year was we changed it from being you can ask us for just about anything, money for just about anything in the community, so football shirts, whatever you need, whatever's important to your community, you can ask us for. We simplified that and said mental health support and access to food, because those as a business were the 2 areas that we felt were the most in need during that period. And taking Marsha's point about this all these different bits have to come together to grow that capability, and money is not the only answer. Volunteers is not the only answer. I would say, if we had 50 applications from food organisations during that period, I suspect they would be fairly evenly mixed in terms of what they needed to grow their capability. Everybody had a different need, but it was absolutely about what is our need, what's our premises look like, how safe is it, how can we make it work, and what do we need to make it work. Everything from racking and refrigeration and transport and paid drivers. Food, yes, people did ask us for food, but that was probably less so. They needed other things. They had the food, they had access to food, they had access to money, to be fair, but they weren't it wasn't enough for these big capital bits of expenditure. So, you know, new refrigeration and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I would like to think the investment that's been put into those groups will help them in the future. However, also taking the point about what we've invested in is an emergency measure. And the way I view that is taking that whole food dignity, let's call it that bit, and the whole idea of it not being a very Dickensian, here's your food parcel, now run away and be grateful. That's gone back, I would say, 15, 20 years. You know, we've got so many through the survey that Simone and the team at Fareshare UK have done. There's just so many groups that don't even ever envisage getting back to being able to offer that wraparound care, because they're trying so hard to deal with the demand for food. They haven't got all those other that resource to do all the extra stuff. And I think as a business, that's where we see our investment over the next 2 to 3 years, is just try and support grassroots organisations to get back to or be better than they were pre-COVID. But yeah, there's lots of opportunities. We wish it wasn't the case. We would like to not have to rebuild. But yeah, I think that's where we would see our investment going over the next few years.
Yeah, I suppose it's their longevity, isn't it? There's been so much kind of response to the huge demand. These new kind of procedures and what's been kind of built up is how long we can kind of sustain that, and how much is that a long-term solution, I suppose, as well. So okay.
Jordon, can I just quickly say, somebody asked a question, Ronald Ranter. Sorry, I haven't met you before. Maybe one of my colleagues have, but asking, say, Fareshare were able to discount or even provide our membership fees for free during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, which was great for our members, great for us to be able to offer that to our members. That funding actually came through one of our a major retailer. We have no plans for extending that. Sorry to be the baddie, but we can't go back to providing free memberships. Fareshare is sustainable from funds raised, like the rest of our charity partners, and a subscription for the service that we provide. And we think the service is great value for money. What we can commit to is trying to understand their challenges and maybe signposting our membership organisations to places to get that funding, but it's not something that we have in the pipeline for providing free memberships again. Sorry. But I think we've kind of played our part in that over the past 18 months.
Great, okay. I think we'll have to wrap it up there, a bit over the time we said, but I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for presenting. Thank you for giving your own views on the experience of the services you provide during the pandemic. It's really, really interesting. And I hope we're going to continue the relationship going forward. We've got the research that Marsha's undertaken with me and David, etc. And if you want to see the film again, we'll put that on YouTube and make that available for everyone. Do you have any kind of final comments, Marsha or David?
No, David, I'll leave it to David to close.
Okay, thanks, Marsha. Thanks everybody. Yeah, I've already put the link to the video is on there, so please copy that, share it, because I think that the more eyes get to see it and see the realities of what's been going on, because as Jordon and Marsha have both pointed out, so much of what's gone on has been invisible. Now, that hasn't been invisible particularly to the people today in this particular group, because you're the folk who are, you've been engaged in it one way or another, whether as practitioners or as researchers and so forth. But so many people in the policy domain, the public domain and so forth just really don't know the realities of what everybody's been doing and the stresses and strains that people have faced. And I certainly find that myself, watching the video, listening to the presentations, listening to folk like Hannah and Simone speaking, you get this really divided emotions. On the one, on the happy side, you think, God, it's just great to be part of the human race when people step up like this at times of need and do these amazing things, and particularly looking at the volunteers in the video, what they've done. But then of course you look at the other side, which is what human beings are also doing, which is creating that situation in the first place and not dealing with it, and to feel that so many people have been in such vulnerable positions you know, is, it's just extremely emotional. And, you know, we're all very aware that folk on the front line have been dealing with that day in, day out for the last 18 months and before that. And the chilling thing is they're going to be for some time. And that's one of the big things, is where the energy and money is going to come from. So we really hope that this isn't all just academic exercises or whatever. This is about how can policy be pushed and shifted, and how there can be grassroots movements to really get some of these items on the agenda beyond, you know, wonderful people like Marcus Rashford have done amazing stuff, but you just got to have more groundswell pushing these social justice issues going forward. So from us, it's been great to be able to do the research. We're looking forward to taking that forward in terms of policy recommendations and working with you know, Fareshare and others to do that. But thank you everybody for turning up today, and we hope you've all got the energy and time in your diary to rock up tomorrow, where we've got other sets of angles to explore all around the business of creating a future food system that works for all. Thank you, everybody.